The DOJ announced that they cracked a major terror plot, this time in California. Plus, we'll get to the dumbest assumption in all of politics first. These days, it feels like anything can happen. News breaks fast, culture moves even faster. Most platforms are either asleep at the wheel or actively lying to your face. Daily Wire Plus is different. It's ad-free, uncensored shows from the most trusted voices in conservative media, live breaking news as it happens, and editorial coverage that actually tells you what matters. And it's not just news. Members get access to our growing library of premium entertainment, including the upcoming 7-part epic, The Pendragon Cycle Rise of the Merlin. Right now, during our Christmas sale, new memberships are 40% off, or you can give an annual membership for 50% off. Go to dailywire.com/subscribe and join right now. Well, yesterday, the Attorney General of the United States, Pam Bondi, announced that after an investigation, the DOJ actually uncovered a massive and horrific terror plot in the Central District of California. That would be Orange County and LA. She put on X the following statement: the Turtle Island Liberation Front, a far-left, pro-Palestine, anti-government, anti-capitalist group, was preparing to conduct a series of bombings against multiple targets in California beginning on New Year's Eve. The group also planned to target ICE agents and vehicles. This was an incredible effort by our U.S. attorneys and the FBI to ensure that Americans can live in peace. We'll continue to pursue these terror groups and bring them to justice. Here is Bill Asaley. He's the first assistant U.S. attorney breaking down the plot as the FBI explained it to him.
In November 2025, Defendant Carroll created a detailed bombing plot to use explosive devices to attack 5 or more locations across Southern California on this upcoming New Year's Eve. Carroll and her co-defendant, Zachary Page, led the effort to obtain and build the bombs and to recruit others to join in their plot. Carroll's bomb plot was explicit. It included a step-by-step instructions to build IEDs or improvised explosive devices, and listed multiple targets across Orange County and Los Angeles. Carroll also made clear her desires. She said, quote, "What we are doing will be considered a terrorist act." Carroll and Page also discussed plans for follow-up attacks after their bombings, which included plans to target ICE agents and vehicles with pipe bombs. Carroll stated that those plans would, quote, "take some of them out and scare the rest."
According to Cassia Kiva reporting for our Daily Wire, all of the defendants have been charged with conspiracy and possession of a destructive device. According to an affidavit obtained by the Daily Wire, the lead person in this gave an 8-page written document titled Operation Midnight Sun that detailed the bombing plot to a law enforcement source. The plan included planting backpacks with pipe bomb IEDs and simultaneously detonating them at 5 locations, including 2 American companies, at midnight on New Year's Eve. The plans included information about how to manufacture the bombs and guidance to avoid leaving behind evidence. And apparently they took multiple steps to carry out the plot, including acquiring bomb-making materials and traveling to a remote location in the Mojave Desert to construct and detonate a test explosive device on December 12th. While they were there, they began assembling devices using materials such as precursors, PVC pipes, and fuses before they were arrested. An Instagram account for the so-called Turtle Island Liberation Front, apparently that is an indigenous term for North America, adopted by radical leftists who say that the name North America is colonialist. So apparently an Instagram account for the Turtle Island Liberation Front in LA, which authorities say is operated by the aforementioned Carroll, shows a woman named Mary masked with a keffiyeh explaining the ties between Palestine and Turtle Island. Quote, "Palestine is the true name of Israel. It's the same with Turtle Island. That was what the original tribes on the Americas, before it was called America, it was known as Turtle Island, because believe it or not, if you look at the map, rather from the top down, but the bottom up, if you flip that map of the Americas, it looks like a turtle." Other posts on the account include not only anti-Israel and anti-government slogans, like resistance is the deepest form of love, and capitalism prevents liberation, but also death to ICE and death to America. Apparently, the group was looking for reparations and land back to indigenous groups. I do find it amusing that they believe that Palestine was the true name of Israel, which is strange. That was a name given by the Roman Empire to the land of Judea, which is what it was called before it was called Syria Palestina. In any case, the reason that this is, of course, disturbing is because this coalition of left-wingers, radical left-wingers, anti-capitalists, anti-Semites, Islamists, this sort of coalition has been building for a very long time. Because in the end, what do they hold in common? A desire to destroy Western civilization, a desire to tear down anything in the civilized West that is, in fact, successful. And that is why I truly believe that one of the dumbest things that we can do is to flatten out all ideologies and pretend all human beings think the same way. Every time anyone does this, you end up with the worst possible policy. So if you say, for example, all human beings have a yearning in their human heart for freedom in the same exact way, well, that can very easily lead you to the sort of policies pursued by the George W. Bush administration, in which the president declared that it was the goal of the United States to end tyranny on planet Earth. Of course, that is not a sustainable goal, because it assumes that everyone has the same priorities that you have. In the same way, when you suggest that all acts of violence are equivalent, when you abstract terrible things happening, specific terrible things happening to the level of the general, when you say, okay, there's a specific terror act directed at, say, Jews, or against blacks, or against whites for that matter, and instead of looking at the specific cause that is being pursued, instead of looking at the specific ideological matrix used to justify violence and foment violence, instead of looking at that, you just say, violence is bad. And all human beings should just know that violence is bad. What you are doing is preventing the actual solutions to these problems. Because if you refuse to face up to the fact that certain ideas are worse than other ideas, certain cultures are worse than other cultures, certain ideological frameworks are worse than other ideological frameworks, if you refuse to do that, you are missing the motivating factor in human action. And instead, what you end up with is blunderbuss foreign policy that differentially strikes groups in an unfair and stupid way. We'll get to more on this in a moment. First, this episode is sponsored by our friends at Pure Talk. As a consumer, you carry the success or failure of businesses in the palm of your hand. Their success depends on your decision to spend money with them or their competitor. Well, my friends at Pure Talk would like to say thank you from the bottom of their hearts for choosing Pure Talk for your wireless needs. Because of you, they've had a record-breaking year. Because of your generosity through their Roundup for Charity program, they've been able to donate over $500,000 to America's Warrior Partnership, which stands on the front lines of preventing veteran suicide. Your patronage has allowed Pure Talk to donate 1,000 hand-sewn Made in America flags to your fellow veterans. And when you choose Pure Talk as your wireless provider, you choose to support American jobs. Like I said, as a consumer, you have the power to make or break companies, and with the money the big wireless guys throw around on advertising, you're inundated with offers everywhere you look. So, from everybody in the Pure Talk family, thank you for your trust, and God bless America. Again, you can head on over to Pure Talk and join all my other listeners who've been using Pure Talk for a very long time. Best coverage from a company that actually likes you. Go check them out right now over at puretalk.com. Also, this episode is sponsored by Helix. Sleep is your secret weapon during cold and flu season. It's literally when your immune system does its most important work. But here's the thing. You can't get that deep restorative sleep if you're tossing and turning on the wrong mattress. When you're fighting off germs or trying not to catch them in the first place, having a mattress that actually supports your body and keeps you comfortable all night isn't just nice to have, it's essential. Nobody wants to be tired and run down during the holiday season, and Helix knows how to make sure you're waking up your best self. Finding the right mattress doesn't have to be guesswork. Helix makes it simple with their sleep quiz. It asks about your preferences and sleep style, and then matches you with the mattress that's actually right for you. And they're not just making promises. Helix is the most awarded mattress brand out there with glowing reviews from Forbes, Wired, and other trusted experts. The best part? They deliver straight to your door with free shipping, so no hauling or anything yourself. Plus, with their Happy with Helix guarantee, you get 120 nights to try it out and a limited lifetime warranty. So if it's not working for you, returns and exchanges are totally seamless. It's basically a risk-free way to finally get the sleep you deserve, especially when you need it most. We've had our Helix Sleep mattress for years. It was personalized for us. You can do the same thing. Head on over to helixsleep.com/Ben for 20% off site-wide. That's helixsleep.com/Ben for 20% off site-wide. Make sure you enter our show name into the post-purchase survey so they know we sent you. helixsleep.com/Ben. So, Sunny Hostin over at The View, she did a good version of this the other day. She was commenting on the mass shooting in Bondi Beach in Sydney against Jews by two Islamists. And here's what she had to say.
I used to think that gun violence was just an American phenomenon, and now we see this sort of anti-Semitic attack in Australia.
On the first day of Hanukkah.
Yeah. Which is so disgusting and disturbing. And then, kids going to college at Brown in the middle of finals, getting murdered. What are those families going through? Why all of this sickness and hatred going around the world, not just in
and
this
it's all
country.
awful in its own lanes.
Why all the sickness and hatred going around the world? Okay, on a generic level, the level of a 2-year-old, sure. But let's be very clear. Different ideological groups commit different types of crimes. Some commit no crimes. Some actually promote peace. Some ideologies promote vast terror attacks, like radical Islamism. And when you reduce everything to, well, it's just an act of violence, or you reduce it to the tool. When you look at the Brown University shooting, where we still don't know the motive, and then you look at what happened in Sydney, Australia, where you absolutely know the motive, and you just flatten that out and pretend that's all the same, you're preventing the implementation of policies that would actually prevent shootings. Because there actually is a way to target radical Islam in, for example, Sydney, Australia. Don't import more radical Muslims would be one way. Surveillance of radical mosques might be another way. Creating better security apparatus. Having a government that does not, in fact, grant credibility to radical Islamists and their arguments. That might be another way to do it. There are lots of things that we can do, actually, to fight particular ideologies, particular ideas. And when you flatten that all out to the idea that it's all just gun violence, what you are doing is preventing the solution. And unfortunately, I think that is kind of the core of the debate sometimes between the right and the left, the traditional right and the left, because I always have to clarify this now, because there are people who exist on the so-called political right who are not in any real way conservative. They just don't like some of the elements of the left, and so they found themselves on the right, sort of bizarre fellow travelers. But traditional conservative thinking suggests that human beings are motivated by the ideas and ideologies that they carry. And also that human beings are deeply flawed. They are not inherently good. That human beings have the capacity for greatness and also the capacity for sin, right? All of this is embedded, for example, in Federalist 51, in which James Madison argues that if human beings were angels, you wouldn't need a government in order to govern them because they would be angels. Once you recognize the reality of human flawed nature, once you recognize that people, in fact, change their behavior based on the ideologies that they hold, then it makes it possible to look at the outgrowth of particular ideologies and then fight those ideas, fight those ideologies. Otherwise, what you end up with is bad and stupid public policy. So Australia is a great example of a place that has bought into the sort of left-wing nostrum that everybody is equally good, that all human beings are born inherently good and wonderful, and therefore the only thing we have to do is keep them away from particular tools. Like, for example, guns. If you keep them away from the guns, then magically everything will be better. As opposed to, hey, maybe there's a difference between kind of normie Australianness and radical Islam. Maybe we shouldn't import hundreds of thousands of people from Syria. Maybe we should make sure that before we decide to change the culture of our country, we recognize that not everybody thinks the same way, that not everyone behaves the same way. The single dumbest idea in all of politics is that all human beings think the same way and have the same priorities. So, to take Australia as an example, it turns out that one of the shooters in the anti-Jew terror attack at Bondi Beach was previously investigated by authorities for his ties to an Islamic State terror cell. This is a father-son team. The son was investigated by Australia's domestic intelligence agency, ASIO, 6 years ago, according to Australian media. Police say the attack was inspired by the pair's dedication to ISIS, with 2 ISIS flags reportedly discovered in their vehicle. Apparently, police reportedly first took an interest in the 24-year-old terrorist, according to the Daily Wire, after they foiled an ISIS attack that was planned by a man who declared himself the Australian commander of an ISIS cell in Australia. He was under investigation for 6 months before being deemed to pose no ongoing threat. ASIO Director General Mike Burgess confirmed on Sunday one of the terrorists was known to law enforcement. The younger shooter is in critical condition. His father was shot dead by officers at the scene. Now again, why does this matter? Because let's say that you wanted to, stop anti-Jew terror attacks in Sydney, Australia. One of the things that you might do is you might look at how to shut down, for example, ISIS sympathizers. Maybe you ought to look at how to deport ISIS sympathizers rather than importing ISIS brides in repatriation, which is what the Australian government actually recently did. But instead, what you get is this attempt to put the focus on the gun. Now, again, one of the things that's kind of astonishing about the gun control argument is that the focus typically on the weapon obscures the focus on the ideology, which is really stupid. Because let's be real, I am a gun owner. Virtually all my friends are gun owners, and none of us have committed a gun crime or will be really in danger of committing a gun crime. How do I know? Well, because I know that the people who I am friends with are not the types of people who go around shooting up mass gatherings. And in fact, you can pretty easily tell where the gun crime is going to happen in the United States. And it actually does not have to do with the prevalence of guns in those parts of the United States. Vermont has many, many guns and very, very little gun crime. Chicago has many guns and much, much gun crime. Why? Well, because gangs are incredibly prevalent in Chicago. Young fatherless males are wandering around at night with guns in Chicago, and they aren't in Vermont. You can actually look at the social milieu. You can look at a particular endemic problem in certain areas and target that. But if you believe that all human beings are, again, motivated by the same things and act in the same ways, then what you end up with is it must be the guns. And this is exactly what they are doing in Australia. So, while the benighted Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese of the Labour Party will admit that this targeted Jews, the focus isn't on radical Islam in Sydney, where they've had a massive problem. Again, in 2023, right after October 7th, there were Muslims who gathered en masse at the Sydney Opera House to chant "Gas the Jews," but apparently that was no problem. There have been anti-Semitic gatherings pretty much every weekend in Australia. That was no problem. The problem, of course, is the guns. So here's Anthony Albanese saying that he stands with the Jewish community.
This was an attack deliberately targeted at the Jewish community on the first day of Hanukkah, which of course should be a joyous celebration. And the Jewish community are hurting today. Today, all Australians wrap our arms around them and say, we stand with you. We will do whatever is necessary to stamp out anti-Semitism. It is a scourge, and we will eradicate it together.
Okay, so they're going to eradicate anti-Semitism without actually doing anything about anti-Semitism. They're going to target the guns. So here was Albanese yesterday talking about the actual solution. Wait for it. More gun control. So let's just be clear. The only people in the situation at Bondi Beach who had guns were the shooters. None of the people on the beach had a gun because gun control is extremely strict in Australia. And the cops cowered behind their cars doing nothing while the shooting took place. And his solution is, yes, more gun control. Not Islamist control, gun control.
The government is prepared to take whatever action is necessary. Included in that is the need for tougher gun laws. And this afternoon at 4 o'clock, I will put on the agenda of the National Cabinet tougher gun laws, including limits on the number of guns that can be used or licensed by individuals. A review of licences over a period of time. People's circumstances change. People can be radicalised over a period of time. Licences should not be in perpetuity. And checks, of course, making sure that those checks and balances are in place as well. We will I'll take to National Cabinet this afternoon a proposal to empower agencies to examine what can be done in this area.
Now, the Premier of New South Wales, Chris Minns, said the same thing, that Australia needs more gun laws. Forget about stopping the importation of radical Muslims into the country or keeping tabs on the radical Muslims who are already there. No, it's the gun laws that are really the big issue there.
They need to change, and they can change. It does require legislation, and it means introducing a bill to Parliament to be really blunt, make it more difficult to get these horrifying weapons that have no practical use in our community.
Do you think
if you're not a farmer, if you're not involved in agriculture, why do you need these massive weapons that put the public in danger and make life dangerous and difficult for New South Wales Police? So I understand, of course I understand, the genuine desire to have information about how the law will change. We're less than 24 hours into this horrifying crime. I want to make sure that legislation and reform that we bring to Parliament makes a big difference, but that's exactly my intention, and my colleagues feel exactly the same way.
Now, focusing on the wrong things allows you, as an advocate for things like radical Islam, to simply misdirect. It's pretty amazing. We'll get to more on this in a moment. First, this episode is sponsored by Cars for Kids. Yes, Cars for Kids. And yes, I know, you're already hearing the Cars for Kids jingle. Okay, stay with me. If you've got a car you're not using, this would be the moment to move. Donate that car to Cars for Kids right now before the year closes out. Head on over to carsforkids.org/Ben. That's carsforkids.org/Ben. And fill out the quick online form. Cars for Kids makes it ridiculously easy. They've been doing it for over 30 years now. They pick up your car for free. Cars for Kids handles the towing. Cars for Kids handles the paperwork. You don't deal with buyers, listings, or any of that insanity. You get a tax deduction, and Cars for Kids even includes a vacation voucher. So it's simple. Clear the space, do some good, and get something back. But here's the thing. Year-end is now here. If you want that 2025 tax deduction, your Cars for Kids donation needs to be in before December 31st. Don't wait. Don't overthink it. Do it today. carsforkids.org/Ben. And yes, 1-877-CARS-FOR-KIDS, KARS, Cars for Kids. You're hearing it again, aren't you? You're not going to get that out of your head. And honestly, that's kind of the point. Go to carsforkids.org/Ben to donate your old vehicle. Carsforkids.org/Ben. That's Cars for Kids, cars with a K. Also, we all have that one unforgettable gift until it broke or it wore out or got lost. What if you could give something that actually lasts? With our show sponsor, Policy Genius, you can give your family a gift that actually endures: the security of life insurance and lasting peace of mind. Nearly half of American adults would face financial hardship within 6 months if they lost their primary income. Policy Genius makes finding life insurance simple. It helps you secure real coverage so your loved ones have the financial safety net they need when it matters most. Look, if you've been putting off life insurance, now's actually a great time to sort it out before the end of the year. Policy Genius makes the whole thing way less painful than you would think. It's a simple online marketplace where you can compare quotes from all the major insurers in one place completely free. They've got a team of licensed experts who will walk you through everything, answer your questions, deal with all the paperwork, and help you figure out what coverage actually makes sense for you without all the confusing insurance jargon. The whole point is to find you the most affordable policy that actually fits your situation, and based on thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot, they are clearly good at it. It's just a much simpler way to handle something that usually feels overwhelming. With Policy Genius, real users have gotten 20-year, $2 million policies for just $53 a month. Don't wait until next year. Give your family the gift of security today with Policy Genius. Head on over to policygenius.com/Shapiro to compare life insurance quotes from top companies. See how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/Shapiro. So, for example, Representative Ilhan Omar, who is herself a vast repository of anti-Semitic sentiment. Ilhan Omar is out there saying, well, maybe Australia should try more gun control. I can't imagine where the anti-Semitism is coming from. I mean, it's such a mystery. It's such a mystery. What I need is advice on how to prevent anti-Semitic mass terror attacks from Ilhan Omar.
Yeah, we are still recovering from the shooting at Annunciation Church. It is a tragedy that this has become a normal occurrence, not just in the United States, but now seeing it in Australia, who's worked really hard to create gun prevention laws to prevent the kind of tragedy that took place today.
This is the beauty of your complete flattening of all moral boundaries, is that you can have people who are complicit in the ideology that actually leads to terrorism, instead suggesting that actually they're against that. They're against it. They're part of the solution rather than part of the problem. Pretty impressive stuff. Meanwhile, in the United States, Democrats, the nice thing for Democrats is they don't even have to wait in order to jump into the water when it comes to mass shootings. Typically the way that this works is if a mass shooting is carried out by a radical Muslim in the United States, or by, for example, a radical leftist in the United States, Democrats immediately suggest that gun control is the answer. If it's a right-wing shooter or someone perceived as right-wing, it's a white supremacist, for example, then the left will immediately do what actually should be done very often, which is investigate the ideology. What I'm saying is perfectly consistent. If ideologies tend to breed terrorism, then we ought to critique the ideologies. We ought to think about what about those ideologies leads to terrorism, and we ought to think about what we can do in order to combat those ideologies. Because that's what motivates human beings, not the instrument on the table, not the gun. But for the left, it allows them the ability to blame everything on the gun when it's convenient, blame it on the ideology when it's convenient. So, for example, Democratic Representative Angie Craig of Minnesota, she immediately called for, wait for it, more gun control.
Cheryl and I are just devastated. Another act of senseless gun violence in this country. And we're the only nation in the world whose lawmakers don't seem to be willing to step forward and at least try to address this epidemic we have across our country. I am so saddened. I am just disgusted with my Republican colleagues and their lack of acknowledgement that these lives matter, their lack of acknowledgement that these Annunciation school children matter in our country, and that we can do something about it. It is time to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines in our nation.
So, here's the problem. None of this actually solves the underlying issues. None of it. Okay? And when we ignore the underlying issues in favor of these ridiculous nostrums about all acts of violence springing from the same place, and all of them presumably being solvable by more centralized government control, including the confiscation of guns, you ignore the actual problems simmering under the surface that generate actual violence. Okay, meanwhile, new and horrifying details emerging regarding the murder of Rob Reiner and his wife. Apparently, according to the New York Post, Rob Reiner's troubled son, Nick, fatally stabbed the famed director and his wife, Michelle, at their LA home, authorities said on Monday. Nick Reiner, who spent years in and out of rehab for drug addiction, is in custody and being held. He was detained Sunday night after police discovered the director of The Princess Bride and his longtime spouse had been hacked to death in their mansion, which is just horrifying at every possible level. The couple's daughter, Rami, found Rob Reiner, 78, and Michelle Reiner with their throats slashed around 3:30 p.m. on Sunday and told cops she believed a family member should be a suspect. Rami also told the cops she thought the relative was dangerous. Nick Reiner had talked openly about his battles with addiction and bouts of homelessness. He told People magazine in 2016 that he was homeless in Maine, homeless in New Jersey, homeless in Texas, that he went to rehab at age 15, ended up doing at least 17 stints in treatment. So, again, truly a horrifying situation, really horrifying in every possible way. Apparently, he had a reputation for violence and had always been troubled. That's what the New York Post reported. This is not the first time their son has been violent, a longtime neighbor of the victims said of Nick Reiner. I know of another incident a few years back with Nick, but I won't say more than that, added the man. I just never thought it would ever get to this point. Rob was always heartbroken. His son couldn't beat his addiction. I know they wanted him to get help to go to rehab, but he wanted to get help while at home. He didn't want to get treatment at a facility. And I know they've argued about that for years. Nick has had demons for the longest time. It's such a nightmare. The whole thing is a tragedy. A second neighbor said, I wasn't surprised to learn that Nick was charged with killing his parents. The resident declined to elaborate. Again, terrible, terrible story, obviously. There's a report from the UK Daily Mail that there was a fight that happened at a Christmas party at Conan O'Brien's house shortly before all of this. According to the UK Daily Mail, Reiner had booked a massage on the day he and his wife died, but did not answer the door, prompting the couple's daughter to go into their home. And that's when she had discovered that they had been knifed to death. Apparently, the couple's son had an explosive row with his parents at Conan O'Brien's holiday party hours before, and the 32-year-old has now been arrested and booked for felony murder. So, again, truly a horrifying thing. Here is the LAPD's chief, Jim McDonnell, announcing the arrest of the Reiner's son.
They worked throughout the night on this case and were able to take into custody Nick Reiner, a suspect in this case. He was subsequently booked for murder and is being held on $4 million bail.
All of that is again, the only word for it is horrifying. It is a reminder that sometimes, parents and relatives of people who have significant violent mental illness refuse to see the cost of that until it's too late, whether it's a danger to themselves or danger to others. And sympathy sometimes wins out over reason when it comes to the love we have for our family members, and it's something that we all ought to keep in mind as we navigate the travails of life. The President of the United States put out what was truly, I think, a vile and egregious statement about Rob Reiner. And I don't care what Rob Reiner has said in the past. I mean, I do, but it was in the past, and it was bad. And also, what the President of the United States said about Rob Reiner yesterday was quite terrible. Quote, a very sad thing happened last night in Hollywood. Rob Reiner, a tortured and struggling but once very talented movie director and comedy star, has passed away together with his wife, Michelle, reportedly due to the anger he caused to others through his massive, unyielding, and incurable affliction with a mind-crippling disease known as Trump derangement syndrome, sometimes referred to as TDS. He was known to have driven people crazy by his raging obsession of President Donald J. Trump, with his obvious paranoia reaching new heights as the Trump administration surpassed all goals and expectations of greatness. And with the golden age of America upon us, perhaps like never before, may Rob and Michelle rest in peace. That is a horrifying statement from the President of the United States. Truly, truly bad. And again, I have a very high tolerance level after 10 years of the president tweeting random nonsense on the internet, and with great appreciation for much of his policy. That's bad. And it's bad when people say bad things. Sorry, like, I don't understand what a son murdering his parents in cold blood in their home by slashing their throats has to do with Trump derangement syndrome and the apparently peculiar desire of the president to refocus that issue on himself is beyond me. I don't understand it. nor do I think that it should receive any sort of justification or whataboutism. It's just bad. Just bad things are allowed to be bad. That is bad. The president should take it down. The president should apologize. It's not good. Okay, meanwhile, on the foreign policy front, the United States apparently has been moving toward offering Ukraine a significantly more fulsome security guarantee in trying to end the war between Ukraine and Russia. According to the Wall Street Journal, the United States pledged to protect Ukraine from any future Russian attack, offering to support European security guarantees and seek Senate backing for Washington's promised role, which it hasn't yet publicly detailed. The pledge came on the second day of talks in Berlin among the U.S., Ukraine, and European leaders and top officials. It remains unclear to what extent Washington would militarily intervene. That, of course, is the sticking point. It's one thing for the United States to say, hey, we'll do something. I mean, maybe. It depends on what the thing is. We'll do something if the Russians walk across the border. But remember, even Joe Biden, supposedly pro-Ukraine Joe Biden, led off the invasion by weeks before the invasion, saying that if it was a minor incursion into Ukrainian territory, then maybe the United States wouldn't do anything, which, of course, Vladimir Putin took as a green light to do whatever he wanted. However, if this is a real, serious security guarantee, that is the necessity for any sort of deal to get done. That's just the reality. Otherwise, why would Ukraine sign on to anything? Why? What interest would they have? According to the Wall Street Journal, the shift could lift one of the biggest obstacles to keep signing up to a peace deal with Russia. A bigger hurdle still remains over territory, because apparently the Russians want territory that Kyiv hasn't even lost yet. European officials have for months offered Ukraine security guarantees to deter a future Russian attack, but they've stressed the need to have some form of U.S. help to backstop those plans. European officials have advised Ukraine to tread carefully in agreeing to other major concessions until they had locked in clear U.S. military support. U.S. officials say they have secured consensus with Ukraine on 90% of the issues being discussed after 8 hours of face-to-face talks since Sunday between Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and Trump's Russia envoy Steve Witkoff, as well as Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law. U.S. officials say they aren't unduly pressuring Ukraine, but the Trump administration wants a deal done by year-end, if possible. Now, again, we still have no idea if the Russians would accept any of this. So as I've said before, negotiating against yourself is a hell of a strategy. It seems to me that you at least have to hear what the Russians are willing to give up before you start pressuring the Ukrainians, the ones we're allied with, not the ones who are posing a geopolitical threat to our allies. That it seems you might want to get what the Russians are willing to do before you force the people we're allied with to make the concessions. This sort of honest broker nonsense between Ukraine and Russia is ridiculous. Russia, as a governing philosophy, has an idea of significant geopolitical power that threatens American interests in multiple regions ranging from Eastern Europe to the Middle East to Africa to Asia. The notion that somehow we're supposed to play honest broker between the Ukrainians, an invaded country, a country invaded by the Russians, and the Russians seems bizarre, especially given the fact that, again, it is American weaponry that has largely been used by the Ukrainians to resist the Russian aggression in the first place. With that said, the United States is signaling optimism. Moscow has already said, by the way, it would object if proposals developed by Kyiv and Brussels, like U.S.-backed security guarantees, are included in the peace plan, which, of course, that's the basis for any possible peace plan. Why would the Ukrainians sign on otherwise? But a U.S. official said, I would assess it was a really, really positive interaction. We've got consensus on a number of issues we view as critical to getting a peace deal. We have some things to discuss as well. The security guarantees would include monitoring, verification, and deconfliction, and would lay out a role the U.S. would play if Russia breached a peace deal and came back to attack Ukraine. They would also include the provision of weapons to deter a Russian force. The U.S. would not send ground troops. Unclear what the United States would, in fact, send. President Trump said in August that Washington was prepared to use air power to support European troops in Ukraine. It'd be interesting to see what kind of guarantee is allowed. A statement signed Monday by a dozen European leaders welcomed the greater convergence between the United States and Ukraine on ending the war, and they said security guarantees would include help to regenerate Ukrainian armed forces of up to 800,000 troops, the securing of Ukraine's skies, and legally binding commitments to come to Ukraine's aid in the event of a Russian attack. So, we'll have to see exactly what this looks like. Apparently, Zelensky told journalists on Monday it's important the U.S. accepts an Article 5-like plus the corresponding security guarantee. So Article 5 basically says, I won't join NATO, but if Ukraine is attacked, then basically it's kind of like Article 5. We say that we've been attacked, and now you have a treaty obligation to intervene. He says, we're making good progress there. I see the details the military has been working on. They look quite good, even though it's only the first draft. So we'll have to see how all of this works out for the Ukrainians. Now, meanwhile, and this bizarre idea that is spread far and wide in precincts of the right, that the Russians are not a threat to Western interests. I'm just wondering on what basis that is said. What makes people think that the Russians are aligned with the United, like on what? Really, on what thing? The last time the United States tried to align with the Russians proceeded to take over effectively air bases in Syria and proceeded to foment greater war in the region while providing the possibility of aid and supply for countries like Iran. So every place Russia has been given the ability to spread its tentacles, it has brought terror and violence in its wake. So I'm just wondering, like, where is the commonality of interest? Somebody needs to spell it out. Okay, well, apparently, according to the new spy master of Britain's secret intelligence service, Russia poses an acute threat to the West, plotting arson and sabotage operations, assassinations, and cyber and drone attacks all across Europe. This is Blaise Metrowelli, who is the chief of MI6. The new front line is everywhere, she said. The export of chaos is a feature, not a bug, in the Russian approach to international engagement. She describes a new age of uncertainty in which Russia and other hostile powers use a battery of weapons from cyber technology to disinformation to sow discord and disrupt Western democratic societies. That, of course, is not shocking at all. Russia does, in fact, utilize algorithmic boosting in order to generate distrust and suspicion. That is nothing new. How much Americans take that in, that's their choice. But that is a thing that Russia has been doing for a very, very long time. Apparently, she says that the front line is basically everywhere with the Russians. That again, not a shock. Russia has been quite active in the West for years and years and years and years. The other, of course, major geopolitical threat to the United States, a far greater geopolitical threat, is China. And it is worthwhile noting that everywhere China has spread its tentacles, things have gotten worse for U.S. interests. That, of course, includes in Hong Kong. According to the Washington Post editorial board, when China peacefully took control of Hong Kong in 1997, Beijing's communist rulers promised to preserve the former British colony's freedoms and way of life. That promise was eroded a long time ago, and Monday's guilty verdict in the trial of media mogul and pro-democracy stalwart Jimmy Lai extinguished any flicker of hope that still burned in the once vibrant city. Again, it was a dumb idea for Britain ever to hand over Hong Kong. Total foolishness. Lai has been held for some 5 years, mostly in solitary confinement. The 3 judges who handed down the decision were doing precisely what they were handpicked to do: ignore the evidence and use a political show trial to find Lai guilty of colluding with foreign forces and conspiring to publish seditious material, among other ludicrous offenses. It's worth looking at what the judges wrote in their 855-page ruling to see how far Hong Kong has fallen. Lai's intent, they said, was to seek the downfall of the Communist Party, and he used his now shuttered newspaper, Apple Daily, to write and publish articles and editorials to make the Hong Kong people view the government with hatred and contempt. They said that he affiliated himself with Western values. And this is what China believes. That if you affiliate yourself with Western values, then that means that you are bad. You should remember this when we're talking about facing down the Chinese. Again, since the handing over of Hong Kong to the Chinese, they have gripped ever tighter. That, of course, is no surprise. Meanwhile, Chinese billionaires are entering the United States and apparently fathering dozens of children via surrogate. That's according to the Wall Street Journal. Apparently, over and over and over, billionaires are coming to the United States and paying millions in surrogacy fees to hire women in the U.S. to help them build families of jaw-dropping size. Several major billionaires have fathered more than 100 children through surrogacy in the United States. One wealthy Chinese executive, Wang Huwu, hired U.S. models and others as egg donors to have 10 girls with the aim of one day marrying them off to powerful men, according to people close to the executive's company Education. Other Chinese clients are high-powered executives lacking the time and inclination to bear their own kids, older parents, or same-sex couples, according to people who arrange surrogacy deals and work in surrogacy law. All have the wealth to go outside China while maintaining the privacy needed to manage potential logistical, publicity, and legal issues back home. Some have the political clout to avoid censure. The market, according to the Wall Street Journal, has grown so sophisticated that at times Chinese parents have had U.S.-born children without even stepping foot in the country. A thriving mini industry of American surrogacy agencies, law firms, clinics, delivery agencies, and nanny services, even to pick up the newborns from hospitals, has risen to accommodate the demand, permitting parents to ship their genetic material abroad and get a baby delivered back at a cost to up to $200,000 per child, which is pretty insane. Now, all these kids are U.S. citizens by virtue of the 14th Amendment as currently construed by the Supreme Court of the United States. In 2020, under President Trump, the State Department tried to end birth tourism. It's been relatively unsuccessful, however. But yes, the manipulation of the systems by Chinese higher-ups is quite real. Now, meanwhile, the U.S. immigration system, again, the Trump administration is doing a good job overall on immigration. But there is one group of people where we should really think before we deport them. That would include a person, apparently, named Guan Heng. Greg Lukianoff links to a piece called Human Rights in China, and it points out that there was a man who filmed the Uyghur concentration camps and then fled to the United States. He went through South America and finally sailed alone in a small boat for 23 hours from the Bahamas to land in Florida and then released the videos. And this footage became crucial evidence for the international community to confirm what China was doing in Xinjiang. Well, apparently, he was now arrested in upstate New York for illegal entry, and he faces the threat of deportation, where he will be sent, apparently, back to China. Again, not everybody who claims refugee status in the United States should be given it. This seems like, from the fact, a fairly good case. Okay, meanwhile, in good foreign news, Chile has now elected a right-wing leader, which is excellent. Chile has historically been a pretty right-wing country. Really, ever since Milton Friedman and the so-called Chicago Boys went down to Chile and helped restructure their economy in capitalist ways. According to the Wall Street Journal, when Jose Antonio Cast ran for president in 2021, he vowed to crack down on migration and restore law and order on Chile's streets. The conservative admirer of dictator General Augusto Pinochet lost by double digits. On Sunday, he won one of the most lopsided presidential victories in Chile's recent history, again, focusing on migration and crime. That is because there's a feeling in Chile and throughout much of South America that migration, mostly people fleeing out of Venezuela, had spiraled out of control. Cass said we must show great strength against crime, organized crime, impunity, and disorder. Chile can't become used to fear. He'll become the most right-wing leader since 1990. It's the biggest presidential victory by a right-wing candidate in Chile since the 1930s. And so if you were to divide up a map of South America right now, basically the western half of South America has turned red. The eastern half of South America remains blue, but the red is spreading. There's a lot of talk about a so-called pink wave that had overtaken South America over the course of the last decade or so. Pink wave meaning like close to communism. And that seems to be receding and receding quite quickly. So, again, this is good news. It is good to have better allies in South America. Cass' pledge to restore order resonated with voters after protesters looted stores and torched buildings in 2019 unrest, causing billions of dollars in damage. His support surged in the 2021 election amid a backlash against centrist politicians. Cass did make it to the runoff, but then lost to the extremely left-wing president, Gabriel Boric. Boric did a terrible job, and Chileans got more and more worried. Foreign-born residents now make up 10% of Chile's population. And so immigration, even within South America, remains a major issue. It is not just an issue for the United States, an issue for the rest of the world as well. Meanwhile, I have to point out that the Democratic Party continues to be totally wrong-headed on this issue. J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, is out there yesterday complaining about ICE closer to home.
No, the way they're doing it now is just dead wrong. I mean, and I believe unconstitutional. I mean, marching people in uniforms in our automatic weapons through our major cities, where they're mostly just stopping people for being black and brown, not because they're actually undocumented or have committed crimes. You know, that's clearly something that all of us ought to stand up against. And we lived through that. As you know, we are living through it now.
Okay, and again, this idea that ICE is just arresting black and brown people because of their color is insipid at a very, very high level. Pritzker also said, by the way, that as long as you've been here for 5 or 10 years, we should give you a pathway to stay no matter who you are.
These are hard. I'm talking about the people who've been here for 5, 10, 20 years, hardworking, raising families, paying taxes, law abiding, right? All of those folks, and people who are undocumented, right? Those are the very people you'd want to have come into the country if you had a proper immigration policy.
Right.
And so we ought to fix it so that we actually are doing that. And giving people who are here, who I get, some of them, by the way, have broken the law because they crossed the border without permission, but also some who overstayed a visa and are here undocumented, that, we ought to have a path for those folks to stay.
I can't believe the Democrats are doing this routine. But again, doubling down on stupid seems to still be in the catalog for Democrats. Jasmine Crockett, who wants to run for senator in Texas, she takes it to a whole new level. So over the weekend, apparently, she suggested that we need many, many immigrants because black people are done picking cotton. I can't even with this. Like, what are we talking about here? What are we even talking about here? Slavery has not been legal in the United States since the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. What is she even talking about?
So I had to go around the country and educate people about what immigrants do for this country, or the fact that we are a country of immigrants.
Right.
The fact is, ain't none of y'all trying to go and farm right now. Okay, so I'm lying. Raise your hands. You're not. We done picking cotton. We are. You can't pay us enough to find a plantation.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my God. So this is your case for mass immigration? Okay, good luck with that. Good luck with that. I will say that one person who seems to be getting it, maybe late in life, is Nancy Pelosi. So Nancy Pelosi, actually yesterday, she suggested that actually maybe we shouldn't impeach Trump right away. Like if they win Congress in the next election cycle, maybe impeaching Trump would be a dumb idea because they tried it twice and it didn't seem to stop him.
You say, well, we're going to do that. No, there has to be cause. There has to be reason. We had review. This was a very serious historic thing. And our founders knew that there could be a rogue president. And that's why they put impeachment in the Constitution. They didn't know there'd be a rogue president at the same time, a rogue Senate that didn't have the courage to do the right thing.
Again, like, okay, maybe she's getting, maybe. We'll find out. Democrats, by the way, seem to be shying away from some of their older messaging, DEI and trans, and instead they're moving again toward bread and butter kitchen table issues. The biggest one that they believe they have is Obamacare and the Obamacare subsidies. According to Politico, Democrats have unified behind a simple message: extend the subsidies, keep health insurance premiums from spiking for more than 20 million Americans. Meanwhile, Republicans are struggling to coalesce. Well, that seems about right. Now, again, Democrats don't actually have a plan to solve this other than just endless subsidies and, in the end, nationalized health care. I guess points to Ro Khanna, the Democrat from California, who continues to say the quiet part out loud. He says we should just nationalize our health care system.
What do you want to say to those who are critical of the Democrats who say you're talking about affordability? It was, in fact, your plan, Obamacare, which bankrupted businesses and continues to be incredibly expensive. The high cost of the Democrats' health care plan did not work.
That's just not true. Look, private health insurance is what's bankrupting America. It was happening before the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act helped slow the growth of private insurance. But of course, it's not the solution. The solution, as everyone knows, in my view, who studied this, is Medicare for all. People should have national health insurance. Health care is a human right.
Well, saying the quiet part out loud, if Democrats decide to do that, things will not go so well. If they just kind of do the soft version, which is subsidies until the end of time, I suppose that is a stronger political line. Well, meanwhile, Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, is out there pointing out that the health of the U.S. government's finances are improving. He says the current calendar year-to-date deficit is $1.52 trillion, which compares to a deficit of $1.93 trillion for the comparable period last year under Joe Biden, a 21% drop. Not only is the deficit smaller under President Trump, the economy is bigger. The full 2025 calendar year budget deficit to GDP may total only 5%, substantially lower than the unsustainably high 6.8% in calendar year 2024 under Joe Biden. And then he says that we're going to grow our way out of debt and into prosperity. I mean, listen, that's better than Joe Biden, but better than Joe Biden is probably not a high enough standard. The reality is that if you go back before 2020, our calendar year budget deficits were lower than $1 trillion, with a few sort of exceptions, including in 2009 when you had the Obama bailouts and all the rest of it. Even then, our calendar year budget deficit in 2009 was $1.41 trillion, which is lower than it is now. And that was the year of the Great Recession. Basically, this is the problem. Government spending, a one-way ratchet, very, very difficult to ratchet it back down for all of the predictable reasons. Alrighty, folks, coming up, it seems that one Republican might be interested in challenging J.D. Vance for the presidential nomination in 2028 and not who you're thinking. Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you're not a member, become a member, use code Shapiro. Check out for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us. The left is now claiming that policing illegal immigration, well, that is basically like white supremacy. Plus, we bring you the latest on whether the United States is going to grab Greenland. Why exactly are we focusing there so much? We'll get to all of that. First, this Thursday is the big moment. After 3 years of writing, filming across 2 continents, post-production, our most ambitious entertainment project finally premieres. The Pendragon Cycle, Rise of the Merlin, a 7-episode cinematic epic that the fans demanded and only the Daily Wire was willing to take the risk on. Episodes 1 and 2 premiere Thursday exclusively on Daily Wire Plus. The story begins before King Arthur, before Camelot, before the legend you thought you knew. This is Merlin as you've never seen him before. If you're not a Daily Wire Plus member yet, this is the moment to see what real premium entertainment is supposed to look like. Get 35% off an annual Daily Wire Plus membership or grab the Pendragon Pass. 3 months of Daily Wire Plus for just $30. That gives you 1 month absolutely free. With the Pendragon Pass, you also receive exclusive Pendragon collectible cards and automatic entry to win a trip for 2 to Budapest, one of the primary filming locations in the series. Go to dailywireplus.com right now. Be there when episodes 1 and 2 of the Pendragon Cycle, Rise of the Merlin, premiere Thursday exclusively at Daily Wire Plus. Well, yesterday, of course, was Martin Luther King Jr. Day, a day celebrating the legacy of a man who is famous in the United States for saying that we ought to judge people based on the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. Because so many Democrats were deeply involved in the civil rights movement. Here, I speak mostly about LBJ and some Northern Democrats because, of course, the story of the Civil Rights Act is one of Southern Democrats largely opposing the civil rights movement. All of the main actors opposing the civil rights movement were, in fact, Southern Democrats. Despite that, Democrats have been searching ever since the civil rights movement for the next civil rights movement. And we've seen many iterations of this over the course of the subsequent decades. We saw a quasi-civil rights movement, for example, pushed by the left with regard to gender and sexuality, the idea that women had to be freed from the predations of the patriarchy, the same way that black people required freeing from the predations of Jim Crow. That, of course, was a bad analogy. And then we heard the same thing with regard to LGBTQ plus minus divided by sign, that this was the new civil rights movement. Well, now, Democrats seem to have hit upon the idea that the new civil rights movement is, in fact, illegal immigration, that illegal immigrants must be allowed to stay in the United States, and that enforcement of the law with regard to illegal immigration is itself a form of white supremacy. The reason that Democrats are stretching on this one is because in other areas, they're sort of running out of examples of widespread American racism, like true policy-driven American racism. They're running out of those examples. The demand is higher than the supply. So just to take a quick example, Eric Holder, the former Attorney General of the United States, on Martin Luther King Day, suggested that the Voting Rights Act is under deep and abiding threat. And not only that, that there is the threat that America was about to be resegregated by the Trump administration.
We are experiencing unprecedented mid-decade gerrymandering attempts designed to disproportionately disenfranchise black and brown voters as the president desperately clings to power like an insecure dictator. There is a concerted effort to resegregate America.
Okay, there is not, in fact, a concerted effort to resegregate America, and no one who is sentient in America believes that there is. No one is worried that black Americans are now going to be forced to drink out of different water fountains or be forced to go to different schools, or that we are going to resegregate restaurants or anything like that. This is a wild overstatement. The reality is that the story of the post-Jim Crow racial situation in America was one of increasing good relations between the races. And this was true all the way up to 2013 by the polling data. A vast majority of both black Americans and white Americans up until about 2013 thought that American race relations were improving steadily and that they had improved markedly since the 1960s. And then, of course, we slipped into the BLM era and the late stages of the Obama presidency, and that sort of sunk Americans' perceptions of race relations. But that does not suggest, in reality, that black Americans are being held underfoot by white Americans, that white supremacy is really what rules the roost these days. So Democrats are looking for their new civil rights movement, because if, in fact, you want to make a moral case for heavy government involvement in something, well, you can make a very good moral case for heavy government involvement to prevent unjustifiable discrimination. right? You can. That case exists. Now, if you go back to the 1960s and you want to relitigate the effects of the Civil Rights Act and talk about the fact that the Civil Rights Act in certain areas stepped on constitutional norms, that's a case made by Christopher Caldwell, I think that case can be made. But if you want to make the case that today Black Americans are victims of a white supremacist system, that is a very difficult case to make. And so Democrats need another excuse for why they ought to be in charge, why they have the moral high ground. And that's a hard case to make. Again, the Democratic Party has lost the moral high ground on a wide variety of issues. The Democratic Party has become not only the abortion on demand party, but the celebrate your abortion party. The Democratic Party has become a party that cannot exactly explain to you why a woman isn't a man and a man isn't a woman. The Democratic Party has become the party of full-scale open borders. And so now they are going to attempt to cram the illegal immigration issue into the missized hole that is the civil rights discussion. You could see this all throughout yesterday. Just tons of discussion about the idea that ICE was actually a new white supremacist force in America, cracking down on illegal immigrants on the basis of race. So, for example, Jennifer Welch, who for some odd reason has now become the podcast bro. So it was very funny. You remember that time that Democrats were looking for their own Joe Rogan? You remember this? They said that they somehow they couldn't speak to young males. And so they needed their own version of Joe Rogan. Well, what they came up with was a middle-aged white liberal lady who tends to screech at you in terms of her rhetorical radicalism. And here she was over MLK Day suggesting that the administration is filled with white supremacists because they wish to enforce the law and deport people who are in the country illegally.
So that is one of those white evangelical churches that turn out to vote for Donald Trump, 80+% of that sect of Christianity. These are the don't tread on me folks. These are the people who feel like America is for Americans and American only. These are white nationalists. And the DOJ got their panties in a wad because these protesters went straight to them and addressed their hypocrisy. You, a gay Black journalist, are, prime bait for them to drum up these charges. But so that's one issue. You went right into the most entitled white nationalists there are, and they feel that ICE is 100% justified.
Okay, so I'm just going to point out this is insane. What she is talking about here is, as we played on the show a couple of days ago, a situation in which anti-ICE protesters descended upon a church where they were claiming that the pastor was some sort of ICE agent, and they proceeded to disrupt the services, which is in all likelihood a violation of federal law, a violation of the so-called FACE Act. On Sunday, Don Lemon, this is the person she's talking to in that clip, entered the city's church during a service along with anti-ICE agitators, according to Fox News, and began filming, telling viewers the freedom to protest is what the First Amendment is all about. Now, the reality is that you do not actually have the First Amendment right to walk into private property and just start protesting. That's not a real thing. You can't just walk into a church and start disrupting services. Not a federal right by any stretch of the imagination. And so her excuse for this is that it's the new civil rights movement. That the real reason why people are angry at Don Lemon for having done that is because he's Black. And the real reason that this church deserved it is because they're a white supremacist church. Now, does she have any proof that the church is a white supremacist church? Is there any proof of that whatsoever? The answer, of course, is no. She has no proof of that whatsoever. But it's enough to say that they are apparently right-tinged, and this makes them white supremacists. Now, again, when you watch that film, it looks as though there are a bunch of people there, not all of whom are white. City's church lists 8 pastors of varying roles, including David Easterwood, who shares the same name as the acting director of ICE's St. Paul office. The fact that this is now considered, according to Jennifer Welch, a form of white supremacy to say you can't disrupt services or to support deporting criminal illegal immigrants is insane. But it's part and parcel, again, of a broader, self-referential, self-righteous program on the part of Democrats to claim that whatever they are doing is the political corollary of what was happening in the 1960s in Selma, which is really quite pathetic. Jennifer Welch went on, by the way, to attack what she called MAGA men like Jesse Waters, which, and this is the way you're going to win over dudes in the next election cycle is somebody like Jennifer Welch. Good luck to you, Democrats.
We have to go after these MAGA men One example would be Jesse Waters. This man talks incessantly about masculinity. Joe Biden is not masculine because he sucks on soup. What kind of man sucks on a straw? He goes on and on and on so much about the idealized man. And that's a part of fascism, this, propelling this form of toxic masculinity. Why are you so obsessed with men, Jesse Waters? What's all that about?
Okay, so he is a fascist, apparently. Jesse Waters is a fascist. And this church is filled with white supremacists. And the casual way that Democrats throw this kind of language around is pretty astonishing. It really is. Jesse Waters is a fascist because he made fun of Joe Biden for not being masculine enough, so he's now a fascist. And if you, again, are a church-going person who believes that illegal immigrants ought to generally be deported and that criminal illegal immigrants in particular ought to be deported, this makes you a white supremacist. Don Lemon was doing the same routine. Don Lemon called the parishioners white supremacists himself. Here was Don Lemon after having, again, it's hard to believe he wasn't part of this actual protest itself, that he wasn't part of the organizing of the protest. I mean, there's supplementary footage showing him kissing some of the organizers and all the rest of this. Here was Don Lemon talking with Jennifer Welch.
And I think people who are, in the religious groups like that, it's not the type of Christianity that I practice, but I think that they're entitled, and that entitlement comes from a supremacy, a white supremacy. And they think that this country was built for them, that it is a Christian country, when actually we left England because we wanted religious freedom. It's religious freedom, but only if you're a Christian and only if you're a white male, pretty much. And so, yeah, I absolutely 100%, but it's an intimidation tactic. And, I said, I don't understand how I've become the face of it when I was a journalist. I do understand that I'm the biggest name there. And I'm also, as I was on with my producers this morning, you and Kylie talk all the time. My producers were saying, I said, how did I become the face of this? And my producer said, Don, you're a gay black man in America.
Oh, give me a break. Give me a break. He's a gay black man in America, and that's why he's the face of this? He's the face of it because he literally showed up in the middle of a protest that people really didn't know much about prior, and he just happened to be there, and then he ended up grilling the pastor, suggesting he was a bad Christian for doing what it is that he was doing, apparently. And now he's out there suggesting the congregation is filled with white supremacists for no reason. I mean, that would be the reason that you're the center of the story, Don Lemon. By the way, Nicki Minaj came out and suggested that Don Lemon had done something wrong. Maybe he might ought to be arrested. And Don Lemon then came back at Nicki Minaj. I guess she's a white supremacist too, the black lady. And he said that she needs to sit the F down.
Why are you supporting this homophobic, bigoted, ignorant woman? You should not be supporting her. Nicki Minaj, this is clearly out of her depth. She doesn't understand politics. She doesn't understand journalism. And I'm not surprised that she is weighing in on something that is beyond her capacity. What I will say to her is, because she put a doll, I think she put the Chucky doll in there, a better symbol that should have been represented in that picture is a pick-me doll, because Nicki Minaj is a pick-me. She will do anything that is expedient for her politically. And again, she's ignorant. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's always weighing in on things that she doesn't know about. Nicki Minaj should just sit the f*** down.
Okay, so again, he's apparently allowed to say that about a black woman, but if somebody says that about Don Lemon, it's because he's gay and black. This is the game. This is the game. And it's a really stupid game. And the prize that is won is more demonstrations, more chaos. We'll get to more on this in just one moment. First, you've heard about it already. You know it's coming. It is the Amazon MGM Studios production, Melania. You know it. You've heard all about it. This is about, of course, the First Lady of the United States, a woman who's been treated truly unfairly by the press. And now you're going to see everything behind the scenes, every protocol, every precaution, every move coordinated. This new film takes you inside the 20 days leading up to the 2025 presidential inauguration through the eyes of the First Lady herself. The briefings, the planning, the private conversations. Witness what it takes to secure her return to one of the world's most powerful roles. Melania is only in theaters January 30th. Also, getting a wide variety of whole food ingredients into my diet, that's a big priority for me this year, especially with constant work travel. Our sponsor, Balance of Nature's Whole Health System, makes it simple. Their convenient blend of fruits and veggies and easy-to-take capsules is kosher and ensures I'm getting those essential nutrients every day without the hassle of prep work or meal planning. It's an effortless way to support my wellness goals while managing a busy, on-the-go lifestyle. Balance of Nature's Whole Health System supplements are incredibly versatile, easy to work into your daily routine. The fiber and spice supplement blends smoothly into your favorite drinks, adding a warm, aromatic depth from its its spice blend. And if you prefer, you can even open up the fruits and veggies capsules and mix the powder directly into a smoothie or sprinkle it over your meals. What makes these supplements special is they're packed with 47 ingredients from 100% real whole fruits, veggies, spices, and fibers. Everything from psyllium husk and flaxseed to cinnamon, turmeric, mango, pineapple, wild blueberries, shiitake mushrooms, spinach, kale, cayenne pepper, and tons more. It's a simple way to give your body the nutrition it needs every day. I'm on the road and, I'm out and about with the kids. It's kind of cold outside. Let's be real. Normally I'd get sick. Balance of Nature is helping make sure that doesn't happen. This New Year's, lock in 50% off for 1 year when you subscribe to the Whole Health System supplements as a preferred customer. Head on over to balanceofnature.com. I said yesterday on the show that the Trump administration, with some of these ICE operations, risks the ire of Americans if the images get ugly. But I also said that if Democrats really continue to up the ante, if they continue to get more and more chaotic, the backlash to Democrats will be stronger than the backlash to ICE. If they end up in abolish ICE territory, that is terrible territory to be in. And it seems like Democrats are courting this sort of electoral disaster and political disaster. Yesterday, anti-ICE demonstrators occupied the local Target. What the hell does the Target have to do with illegal immigration and ICE? They're just trying to sell T-shirts, man. Like, what are you doing at the Target? What the hell?
We are one. Won't stop fighting. Love is one. Love is one. We are many. We are many. We are one. We are one. We won't stop fighting. We won't stop.
You're not fighting. You're sitting in a Target, my dude.
Till ICE is gone.
That's beautiful. I mean, that's talent right there. They won't stop fighting till ICE is gone. They're literally sitting in a Target, like in the makeup section of a Target. And this is apparently going to get ICE removed from the streets of Minneapolis, sitting in a Target. Was Target about to be raided by ICE? Did I miss something here? And also, it seems like all you're doing is really obstructing mothers from being able to buy the orange juice that they require for their children. You're in a Target, people. Like, this is a Wendy's, madam. What are you doing? What are you, like, this is the way you think that you're going to win on an imagistic level, truly? Joining us on the line to discuss what's going on in Minneapolis is, of course, Mary Margaret Olohan. She's our Daily Wire White House correspondent. Mary Margaret, thanks so much for the time.
Thanks, Ben. Great to be here.
So you recently penned a piece talking about a Minnesota prosecutor's aide who ended up as part of this church service that was disrupted. Can you give us some more details on that?
Yeah, so Luke Rosiak with Daily Wire has done a really good job finding a lot of the details on this. Basically, we keep hearing all these stories that, these protesters are grassroots and they're very organically funded. Well, no, in this case, we found out that this prosecutor has ties to the protests and is literally sent a family member to these protests and is engaged with all of these activities in the church itself. And so, Ben, something that I always think of is, we recently saw this attack at the church where a trans-identifying shooter went into this church in Minneapolis, actually, and shot children as they were worshiping. And it is not a thing to be taken lightly to be going into a church and disrupting, let alone over a political protest like this. So incredibly disturbing, incredibly damaging for all these people who are there. It's something that I think about, and I'm sure you think about every time we're in a house of worship as we're worshiping God and hoping that everyone stays safe in this place that is supposed to be peaceful and safe. And so in this story that Luke wrote, I thought it was really fascinating how these protesters are literally being exposed for not being organic, and they're being accompanied by lawmakers, people affiliated with lawmakers, people affiliated with the prosecutors, unlike what the media is trying to say about them.
I mean, it really is astroturfed, and it really is astonishing. Well, I would also be remiss, Mary Margaret, if I did not ask you about a conversation that you had with the President of the United States on another topic, actually, on Friday night. So the president's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, and again, I still maintain that the single best tweet that Donald Trump ever wrote, and there's a long list of them, is the tweet where he suggested, if you ever need a great lawyer, may I recommend not hiring Michael Cohen. that apparently Michael Cohen recently came out and suggested that he was pressured and coerced to only provide information and testimony that would satisfy the government's desire to build cases to secure a judgment and conviction against President Trump. That's something that he put up on his Substack post, and you ended up on the phone talking with the president about all of this. What did he have to say?
Yeah, so we got a tip ahead of time that Substack post was coming. So, we wrote that story quickly. We were ready to go. I wanted to make sure I understood it. And then I circled up with Brent Sher, our editor-in-chief, and we thought we should call the president about this and see what he has to say. So I did call him, and he told me that it was an incredibly corrupt investigation. He said the story was a really big story, and I thought it was kind of funny. He was like, "Is that good, darling? You got everything you need?" And I was like, "Yes, Mr. President, thank you." And I'm going to have to check in with him the next time we have another story because he's so savvy with the media. He loves to hop on the phone with them. And, he's always said that Michael Cohen was a corrupt lawyer. He's always had plenty of critical things to say about him. And that story in particular really took off that night because this is something the president and his team have been saying for a long time. And Michael Cohen finally admitting that he was pressured and coerced after not admitting to that after all this time was just too much for the president to resist. This is just one of his favorite stories to talk about, and now Michael Cohen's out here admitting it.
No, Mary Margaret, it is kind of an astonishing thing that you can just pick up the phone and call the president. He picks up and just gives you a comment on things. Pretty wild times out there. Well, that is our White House correspondent over at Daily Wire, Mary Margaret Olohan. Mary Margaret, thanks so much for the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ben.
Now, obviously, this is bleeding up into the politics of the Democratic Party. We've mentioned the fact that pretty much every Democratic leader now feels the necessity to pretend that something horrifying is happening when ICE goes and does its baseline job. Well, that translates over to lack of actual law enforcement capacity to do what it needs to do. The DHS Assistant Secretary, Tricia McLaughlin, she said, there are like hundreds and hundreds, over 1,000 arrest detainers not being honored at this point.
But if you look at who is in those jails, currently sitting in those jails, Bill, 1,370 criminal illegal aliens in Minneapolis' custody. Murderers. Those people should serve their time and then they should be turned over to ICE. We have not seen that. We've seen no cooperation. We have not been allowed or have those detainers be honored. That is exactly what we're asking for today. Mayor Walz and, Governor Walz and Mayor Frey should come out today and agree to that. They should also agree to allowing their local law enforcement officers to give our law enforcement officers backup.
Hey, now, again, what are Democrats doing here? Like this, their winning strategy. There is a winning strategy here for Democrats on this issue, and that is, we agree that the law must be enforced, but not this way. But that's not what they're doing. Instead, they're sitting around at the local Target, or they're invading churches. And then they're calling churches places of white supremacy for no reason at all. Like, none of this makes any sense. We do have a reporter on the ground in Minneapolis who has been actually traveling with ICE, did a ride-along with ICE. Here is some of the trailer for Jenny's mini doc where she rode along with ICE agents in Minneapolis.
We are running a tail too. Silver Volvo. These numbers keep increasing, right? Like over 1,000% increases in assaults against us. Like death threats have increased like 8,000%. We really can't even fathom those numbers.
Okay.
I want the resident 2 to 3 stay. How many out? Okay. Oscar?
This is bad back here, guys. We're surrounded back here. Hey, somebody hit the button. Somebody hit the button.
We're still getting followed.
That's the Volkswagen.
Who do you think ICE is arresting?
They're innocent citizens.
Joining me on the line to discuss is Jenny Terr. She's our Daily Wire immigration reporter. Jenny, thanks so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So let's just begin with the obvious. What was your experience like during this ICE ride along? It's obviously a contentious time.
Absolutely. I mean, like you said, it's a contentious time, and we really wanted to go into the belly of the beast, into Minneapolis, and show things from the ICE officers' perspective. They're really facing the brunt of this. These rioters, these agitators who are trying to get into their way and obstruct their arrests. So they're going out there, and from what we saw, they're facing hurdles every step of the way as they're trying to make an arrest. So the second we rolled out of the ICE office there was someone that they tagged as a spotter, watching the car, talking to other people. I mean, it seems very coordinated because once we rolled up to any apartment, house, anywhere where the target was known to be, the illegal immigrant target, there was already dozens of rioters there with whistles, honking their horns, yelling at the agents, saying really nasty things, and then trying to really get in their way. Those ICE officers are there to arrest illegal immigrants. The ones who we were going after that day had rap sheets. I mean, one of them was even let go by sanctuary authorities there. They had asked them to hand them over to ICE from the local jails, and they just flouted the ICE detainer in that case. That guy ended up back on the streets, and now ICE has gone multiple times to try to arrest these people because those agitators are getting in the way. At the same time, they're not really stopping. They want to continue to go after these people, but they're definitely up against some really organized chaos.
And Jenny, you mentioned the people they're going after and the rap sheets. The broad scale perception by a lot of Americans, the polling data shows that ICE is not focusing on criminally legal immigrants. What are you seeing on the ground when you're talking with ICE agents? What kind of targets is ICE focusing in on here?
Right. So the ones that we were focused on that day had drug charges, had pretty violent crimes that they'd committed, assaults. These were people that normally, and your listeners, I'm sure, would want to get off the streets, wouldn't want in their neighborhoods. There's this narrative going around right now is that ICE is going after targeting U.S. citizens. They don't want to be arresting U.S. citizens, but they do have authority to go after them if they're trying to impede their arrest that they're trying to make of these people. And what we saw on our ride along was exactly that, was someone actually got hit in our vehicle convoy because we went with multiple cars, with multiple officers, because they need added protection from each other now because of what they're up against. So agitators were blocking the roads. This was after that fatal shooting. So these agitators haven't learned their lesson. They're just doubling down. They're trying to get in the way, even more so now. We had to pull over at one point because we thought some of our vehicles had their tires slashed, because that's a very normal occurrence now. So they're not only having to calculate the risks of going out and catching someone maybe in their element who's a violent, hardened criminal, but they're also up against these organized agitators who are communicating with each other. Some were on radios following us in their cars, talking to other people in their groups. We know that these ICE Watch groups are extremely savvy and communicate really well online and have trainings that they've held. So it's a really scary time for ICE right now.
And so, Jenny, obviously you're sitting with ICE agents while they're attempting to do their job. What is the sentiment among the ICE agents right now who really are under assault by both the media and by, in some cases, literally people on the streets?
It's interesting because obviously they know what they're signing up for. This is a law enforcement job. They know that they're going to face hurdles. They're going to face threats. But right now, these threats and these assaults up against them are up exponentially. We've never seen anything like this before. I mean, death threats are up like 8,000%. That's just unheard of. So they're still doing the job. It's pretty amazing because they're keeping their heads down. They're trying to really de-escalate these situations so that they don't end up becoming part of these statistics. They don't want more assaults. They don't want to be using lethal force. They want to give orders verbally first, which is what we saw for people that were blocking them in traffic, saying, please move out of the way, telling them multiple times before they needed to escalate, which thankfully they didn't need to, but they did, look to pursue an arrest against the person who had hit them that day. But they are really, trying to just continue to do the jobs because they're dedicated to that goal of getting these millions of illegal immigrants that were let into the country, many who have committed crimes, out. And they want to clean up the mess also of the sanctuary cities.
You mentioned that the kinds of resistance people are facing on the streets and enforcing the law. Obviously, the president has considered the possibility of using the Insurrection Act to deal with this sort of activity on the streets. Given what you've seen, do you think that it would rise to the level of the president calling in further federal forces here?
Well, it certainly seems like a ticking time bomb there. And we saw just after the first fatal shooting just a couple weeks ago that another one did happen because the illegal immigrant targets in that case were so brazen and so emboldened by what's going on that they wanted to attack law enforcement, that they wanted to go after them and assault them. They felt like they could operate with impunity there. And the environment is very much like that, because you have people around you during these arrests who are supporting those illegal immigrants. So it's almost like they have cheering squads for them. And this is only getting more and more organized, larger in numbers. I mean, we saw what happened in that church. That wasn't even involving an arrest. That was just involving allegations that a pastor was part of ICE. So these people are very motivated and are doing everything they can to get out there.
Well, again, amazing reporting. You can see it all in the mini doc that we're releasing over at Daily Wire Plus from Jenny Taylor. She is, of course, our Daily Wire immigration reporter. Jenny, thanks so much for the time, and stay safe out there.
Thank you.
Well, if you're wondering what's going on with this sort of immigration snafu for the United States, one factor here, one major factor when it comes to immigration is the fact that there are foreign countries taking advantage of our systems. It's one of the reasons why it's quite important that the Trump administration is doing what it's doing. There is a book that is out right now, big bestseller from Peter Schweitzer, all about this. Peter joins us on the line. His new book is titled The Invisible Coup, How American Elites and Foreign Powers Use Immigration as a Weapon. Peter, thanks so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
Oh, glad to be with you, Ben, as always. Thanks for having me.
So obviously, immigration is the number one issue in the country right now. The president of the United States has directed ICE to go after criminally illegal immigrants and to broad scale go after a wide swath of illegal immigrants and deport them. But a huge number of Americans probably don't understand how foreign powers have actually activated our immigration programs against us. So your book is really about this, about how our immigration systems have been turned against us. We think of ourselves as the shining city on the hill, as the country of the Statue of Liberty. Bring us your tired and your poor and your huddled masses yearning to be free. And people take advantage of that. So explain exactly how that's happening.
Yeah, I'm the son of immigrants. I think immigration is great. The problem is it's not the immigration of 100 years ago or even 50 years ago. It's been weaponized by foreign governments. So what do I mean? I talk in the book about China. I talk about Mexico. I talk about what the Muslim Brotherhood, what they're doing. Let's just take a look at Mexico. I quote extensively in the book from Mexican leaders, including President Sheinbaum, that they view mass migration to the United States as a reconquista, which sounds like a crazy theory, but they talk about it repeatedly, and they also back it up. They create an infrastructure in the United States that allows them to activate Mexican and Mexican Americans for political benefits. So what does that mean? Look at the consulate infrastructure. The UK and China have 6 and 7, respectively, consulates in the United States. Mexico has 53. And as I lay out in the book, consular officials, these are Mexican diplomats in the United States, Ben, are engaged in not only organizing violent anti-ICE protests and other political activity, they're also actively trying to elect Democrats and defeat Republicans. You have Mexican diplomats involved in political activity inside the United States. That's a clear example, and I have lots of details. China has a different methodology, so does the Muslim Brotherhood, but they see this as an opportunity to effectively wage war on the United States by changing us through mass migration and by political direct action within our borders.
So I want to go through each one of those sources in a moment, Mexico and China and the Muslim Brotherhood, the ones that you just mentioned. Let's start with Mexico. You talk about Reconquista. I mean, is the actual goal that they are going to be able to take back American territory, or is this really about flooding America's borders and ensuring, for example, that jobs move to Mexico, the remittances move back to Mexico? What is their actual hard-nosed goal here?
Well, what they say, Ben, explicitly, and I have dozens of quotes in the book, is that they want to exert sovereignty over portions of the United States that they say were stolen from them in the 19th century at the U.S.-Mexican War. So you have prominent, powerful senators that sit on the National Defense Committee that says we are taking it back and mass migration is the way of doing it. One of Sheinbaum's top aides in December of 2024 said, and I quote, "There are 39.9 million Mexicans in the United States. We are quietly reconquering the territory that was taken from us," end quote. Now, does that mean they think California and Texas are actually going to become Mexican states? Maybe, but I think what they really mean, and what there's plenty of evidence for, is they start exerting sovereign control on territories inside the United States. And I'll give you a very clear, direct answer, Ben. A lot of people don't realize this. There are Mexican senators and members of their chambers of deputy, their parliament, who sit in the United States, live in the United States, and their job is to represent Mexicans living inside the United States, inside the Mexican government. That's literally what they do, which is a massive violation of our sovereignty. One of those, Senator Ruiz, she sits in the Mexican Senate. She lives in Arizona, has actually introduced legislation to turn California into the 33rd state of Mexico. But more importantly, these elected officials, Ben, are not only representing Mexico's interests in the United States. I have numerous examples of them organizing violent protests in this country. And they say, for example, that Los Angeles is, in their term, occupied territory, that Los Angeles is, in their terminology, like the West Bank. They're obviously pro-PLO and Palestinian movement as well. But the point is, they see the United States exerting sovereign control over portions of the American Southwest as illegitimate, and they have various ways in which they want to see that change. And in fact, I would argue that they are seeing some of that change already.
So let's turn to China for a second, because obviously in terms of geopolitical opponents, China is top of the list. You've written extensively about the threat that China represents in your past books. China is utilizing immigration against the United States as well. What is their goal? What mechanisms are they mostly utilizing?
Well, they see mass migration as subversion. And when people think of China, they don't think of mass migration in the same way we think of Mexico and Latin America. But they have created an industrial scale use of birthright citizenship. So birthright citizenship is obviously being heard by the Supreme Court. It's the idea if you happen to be in the United States and you're a foreign national and your child is born here, that child automatically is granted citizenship. The federal government, by the way, our government has no idea how many people are born this way in the country, because when you get a birth certificate, they don't list the nationality of the parents. So the federal government is completely clueless. The Chinese government has done assessments, and their determination is mind-boggling. The Chinese government believes that over the last 13 years, every year, roughly 100,000 Chinese nationals have done this in the United States, meaning we're looking at roughly 1 million U.S. citizens, I'm going to put that in air quotes, U.S. citizens that were born here, but they're Chinese parents and they're mostly part of the Chinese elite, go back to China and raise them in China. So they are U.S. citizens. When they turn 18, they're going to be able to vote in elections. They're going to be able to make political campaign donations. They're going to be able to get U.S. government jobs, but they've never lived here. They've never been educated here. They've had very little exposure to the United States. And that wave is going to start to crest in the late 2020s, because this started in 2011 and 2012. That is a massive threat, I would argue, because you've got 1 million, again, quote unquote, American citizens who are being raised in China that are going to be entering the American mainstream here shortly.
And then meanwhile, you have the Muslim Brotherhood as well. Obviously, the thing that comes to mind there is the Muslim Brotherhood possibly exporting terrorists to American soil using America's lax border policies. I mean, this happened during the Biden administration. There were a number of people who were on the terror watch list who just escaped into the interior of the United States. But if you flood America's borders with people who cannot be vetted from countries that have exorbitant anti-American belief systems, you shouldn't be particularly surprised if you're increasing the risk of terrorism. What is the goal of the Muslim Brotherhood here?
Yeah, the Muslim Brotherhood views this as a civilizational warfare, and they view immigration as a key component of it. They look back at the experience of Muhammad and how he preached the use of migration as a form of colonization and taking over territories. And they speak openly about the fact they don't need to reach sort of critical mass in certain numbers. They're quite confident by controlling certain areas, even if they are a minority, but because they are politically active and they intimidate people around them, that they can gain relative examples of political power. And one of the examples I cite in the book, of course, is Mamdani in New York. Hezbollah, the newspapers of Hezbollah in Lebanon were cheering him on. These overseas networks involving the Muslim Brotherhood and their ancillary groups in the United States were funding his campaign. And the Iranian government even ran an article speculating that Mamdani has a political future. He could even become, he's not American born, so he can't be president, but he could become the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Now, why would they want that? I think we know the obvious answer. But the other thing I think we have to recognize, Ben, is that a lot of the fraud that we're seeing in Minnesota and elsewhere involving the Somali community, for example, is not just, in my mind, random fraud. There are actually a lot of these Islamist leaders that preach how this kind of fraud on public assistance is something that's good and righteous because it's effectively a tax on non-Muslims that are paid to Muslims. So they're actually encouraging Muslims in the United States to engage in this kind of behavior. So I think we have to stop using our experience and our view of what's going on and understand what our adversaries or what they're saying and what they believe. And if we listen to what they say, and I quote them extensively in the book, I think it's pretty shocking what their plans are on these fronts. And it's no way consistent with sort of our traditional view of what immigration should be, assimilation and embracing the American dream. None of these groups want any of that.
Well, the book, again, is The Invisible Coup, How American Elites and Foreign Powers Use Immigration as a Weapon. And the author is Peter Schweitzer of the Government Accountability Institute. Peter, thanks so much for your time and your insight.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
In other news, the Davos summit is kicking off, and President Trump is planning to head to Davos this year with an entourage of U.S. officials. According to the Wall Street Journal, last year, he video conferenced into the World Economic Forum. This time, he's there presumably to knock some heads together. According to the Wall Street Journal, he is expected to address the confab in person for the first time in 6 years. Secretary of State Rubio, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff are also going to show up as well. Now, again, big elephant in the room is going to be what's going on with regard to Greenland. This has now jumped to sort of the top of the issue list because of the sort of pressure that President Trump is exerting on the Europeans and on NATO in particular. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, is already at Davos. He says that the message is going to be that America first doesn't mean America alone.
I think that the U.S.-Swiss relationship, after a rocky period over the past few months, is back on a very good track. What do we want to achieve? I think the message is America first does not mean America alone. And I think President Trump will be talking about this is what American leadership in the world looks like.
Okay, well, I mean, obviously, this is music to my ears. America first should not mean America alone because America alone is weak. At least a lot weaker than it would be with its network of allies. An America that withdraws from the world is an America that is incapable of projecting power in ways that benefit the American people. On the other hand, I have to say that I do not fully understand what President Trump is doing with regard to Greenland right now, because again, there are externalities to just threatening NATO. Apparently, according to widespread reports, the president sent messages to the Europeans basically telling them that they needed to allow him to take Greenland because they did not give him the Nobel Peace Prize. According to Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Store, he sent Trump a text message expressing opposition to the planned tariffs because President Trump threatened a bunch of countries in the EU with tariffs if they didn't allow him to basically just take Greenland. Trump replied that the world would not be secure unless the United States had, quote, complete and total control of Greenland. And he wrote in the message, quote, considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars plus, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace, although it will always be predominant, but can now think about what is good and proper for the United States of America. What now? Color me slightly confused. I don't think that the president ever thought only of peace. I always thought that his program was to think about what was good and proper for the United States of America. And while I know the president covets the Nobel Peace Prize, and frankly, I think he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize for what he did in the Middle East with regard to bombing the Iranian nuclear reactor and helping try to bring the Gaza conflict to an end while freeing the live hostages. again, I'm very sympathetic to that case for the president. I'm not sure what that has to do with Greenland per se. And again, the idea that you're rejected for a Nobel Peace Prize, therefore you are owed Greenland. I mean, that seems like a strange trade. By the way, it seems to me that the Europeans might consider a trade, and that trade would be help facilitate the United States taking Greenland in return for mass support by the United States of the Ukrainian government in the face of the Russians. That seems like a fairer trade, because what NATO really requires is protection on its eastern borders, not on its western borders from the United States. And so if the case that the Europeans want to make is, we need you guys to actually fight the Russians, and the Americans are making the case, we need Greenland to stave off the Russians, well, it seems like there's a gigantic war that has been currently happening in Eastern Europe for several years at this point, in which the Russians are sending hundreds of thousands of troops into the field. And it would be good for the United States to up the ante there, perhaps in exchange for more of a say in Greenland. Apparently, EU officials and diplomats, according to the Wall Street Journal, are taking the U.S. threats to use trade to extract concessions on Greenland extremely seriously, and they see them as the latest evidence of a fundamental reshaping of transatlantic ties. Again, it is unclear whether this is sort of a just kind of annoyance for President Trump, whether this is just something that sticks in his craw, or whether it is part of a larger shift in terms of foreign policy away from American leadership in the world and more toward a sort of bloc level leadership. Like America will lead the Western Hemisphere, and then they'll kind of will go hands off with regard to the Russians in Eastern Europe and go hands off with the Chinese in the Far East. That is the big outstanding question. Now, the reality is that I'm not sure that Americans feel like paying more in tariffs in order to assure that the president can grab Greenland. New studies show, shock of shocks, that American citizens are the ones who basically end up paying the price for tariffs. That, of course, is not a surprise at all. The new research published Monday by the Kiel Institute for the World Economy, a German think tank, suggests the impact of tariffs is likely to show up over the time in the form of higher U.S. consumer prices. That doesn't mean that the tariffs are a win for Europe, but it does mean that American consumers are the ones who are really paying for it. According to the Wall Street Journal, by analyzing $4 trillion of shipments between January 2024 and November 2025, the Kiel Institute researchers found that foreign exporters absorbed only about 4% of the burden of the tariff increases by lowering their prices. American consumers and importers absorbed 96%. That, of course, makes sense, since it is consumers who are the ones who are going to absorb any of the price changes at all of which does raise questions, as to how Americans perceive the economy. Representative Mike Turner of Ohio, he says, people might prefer to focus on the economy, not on Greenland at this point.
I think people would prefer a focus on the economy instead of a focus on Greenland itself. I think certainly in Congress, we're looking at trying to make certain we get the budget deal through and we don't have a shutdown. And, as we look to the president's proposal on national security, we look at his proposal on, increasing our defense budget.
Now, again, I think there's some histrionic quality to people in Europe getting freaked out about tariffs, considering all of the non-trade tariff trade barriers that the Europeans have placed on American products for years. So, for example, when the French finance minister, a man named Roland Lescure, says that he doesn't like when tariffs are used as a geopolitical weapon, it's like, well, I mean, guys, you do kind of do it yourself a fair bit.
We're living through uncharted territories. We've never seen this before. An ally, a friend of 250 years, is considering using tariffs. We don't like tariffs, but certainly we don't like using tariffs as a geopolitical weapon.
Okay, and you get this from the UK's Keir Starmer as well, suggesting that use of tariffs against allies is wrong. Again, the Europeans have been very happy to use regulatory methods in order to discriminate against American product in their continent for a very long time.
Alliances endure because they're built on respect and partnership, not pressure. That is why I said the use of tariffs against allies is completely wrong. It is not the right way to resolve differences within an alliance.
Now, the Europeans could cause some economic turmoil in the United States based on how they respond to President Trump's threats. According to the Wall Street Journal, there are several different options on the table. One would be to hold off on cutting tariffs to zero for many U.S. goods. Remember, the president already cut a bit of a lopsided deal with the EU, wherein there would be a 15% duty on most EU goods shipped into the United States, and the tariffs on American goods going into European countries would be radically cut. The European Parliament has not approved that deal yet. That could theoretically go sideways. There could also be new retaliatory tariffs on some U.S. products. And there's also something called the bazooka. This is an anti-coercion trade tool, apparently. Apparently, it would give the bloc significant leeway to implement export controls, place tariffs on services, restrict intellectual property rights, and curb American companies' ability to bid on public contracts in Europe, among other measures. That would be sort of the biggest thing that they could do. They could also, of course, beef up on defense, close American bases, which would lead to the sort of multipolar world that may be something that some members of the Trump administration actually want. The biggest thing that is a problem is the possibility that the EU and other countries start to look elsewhere for partnerships, namely toward Russia and toward China. Russia, for its part, seems pretty excited about all of this. The Russian economic negotiator was trolling the Europeans, a man named Kirill Dmitriev. He said, "You now miss Nord Stream, don't you?" Because obviously they were using, the Europeans, an enormous amount of Russian oil. And so the idea is, well, you relied on the Americans. Now the Americans are using their economic pressure in order to get you to give up territory. So you miss Nord Stream, don't you? Meanwhile, the Chinese are saying, listen, this is just an aggressive American play. It has nothing to do with China threatening Greenland. This is China making overtures to the EU. That's really what this is.
Already clarified our positions on Greenland multiple times. The international law based on the purposes and principles of the UN Charter is the foundation of the existing international order. It must be safeguarded. We urge the US side to stop using the so-called China threat to use as a pretext to gain selfish gains.
Now, here's the thing. China and Russia are both on the ropes. I do not see the rationale for why the United States would be targeting, for example, the Europeans as opposed to Russia and China. Russia is in serious trouble. Russia is upside down demographically. They're a very old country. They have a financially insecure country. The entire GDP of Russia is lower than the GDP of the state of Florida, for example. They're a giant petro state with nuclear weapons. That is all Russia is, and they've been bleeding manpower. They're in serious financial trouble. They're in serious demographic trouble, serious military trouble. The same thing is true, by the way, for China. China has advantages in certain areas like energy production, but in demographic terms, China's got a massive problem on its hands. According to the New York Times, the government on Monday said 7.92 million babies were born last year. That is down from 9.54 million in 2024. The number of people who died in 2025, 11.31 million, continued to climb. So again, if you do that math, way more people are dying in China than are being born. The latest population figures were reported alongside economic data that showed China's economy grew 5% in 2025. The number of births per 1,000 people fell to 5.63. That is the lowest level on record. According to certain data, this means that China is facing the worst birth rate that it has had in literally hundreds of years. That they were having more babies 250 years ago, like more just base increase in the population. Forget about more babies per capita. Like they had bigger increase in the population a couple hundred years ago than they currently have. China is upside down. They're heavily reliant, by the way, on AI because of this, because they need increases in productivity. That means that there are fewer people necessary in order to pay off the bills. But China also is upside down in terms of its financial status. China has a low retirement age. The government raised it for the first time since the 1950s last year. They plan to gradually increase the official age by 2040 to 63 for men and 58 for women in office jobs, 55 for women in factories. It remains among the lowest in the world. They basically hide their debt problems in local and regional debt. All of this is a gigantic mess. It is a huge mess for the Chinese. So why exactly would we be taking the pedal off the metal in order to pressure NATO on Greenland? It just seems like a misallocation of resources, a fairly major misallocation of resources. And if this is a lifeline to our geopolitical opponents, because they're now going to go to the EU or go to Canada and cut trade deals with those countries that are moving away from the United States, why would we revivify a bipolar world by giving up our hegemon status for no reason that I can really see? It doesn't make a lot of sense. Alrighty, folks, the show is continuing for our members right now. We're going to get to a brand new study showing that actually women are more likely to support political assassination. What is going on? Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.